My mommy's still breathing in the box. The words came thin and urgent over the line, a child's voice edged with panic. The 911 operator paused, headset pressed tight, caught between disbelief and duty. Before we dive into the story, tell us where you're watching from. What unfolded from that single call was not a prank, nor the echo of grief, but a case that forced an entire town to question how we decide when life has ended. At the heart of it stood one little girl who would not stay quiet. And it all began at the cemetery. The cemetery sat hushed beneath a low ceiling of gray, the breeze carrying only the muted sound of people shifting in their places. Dark coats gathered around the grave, a cluster of muffled grief against damp grass. Off to the side stood the little girl, her arms locked around a threadbare teddy bear. She did not watch the mourners. She fixed her eyes on the coffin. When she whispered that her mother was moving, a hand brushed her shoulder. Soft words blaming the wind inside the box. But the girl pressed closer, palms flat on polished wood, her breath leaving small fogged circles that quickly vanished. Some adults exchanged knowing looks, murmuring about children and their fragile ways of coping. Then came the thump. Faint, muffled, but sharp enough to cut through the quiet. The girl snapped her head up. "She's knocking," she cried out, her voice carrying across the rows of bowed heads. Some frowned with pity, some shook their heads. A few turned away as if refusing to hear. And here's a question for you. What would you have done in that moment? The minister's low prayer continued, but the girl did not move back. Her small fingers traced the seam in the lid, searching for a way inside. Her cheeks flushed, her breath caught fast and shallow. Behind her, the shuffle of shoes grew impatient, the director glancing down at papers that showed every official line confirming a completed death. Yet here was a child insisting those lines were wrong. Soil struck the wood with a dull pop, the first scoop landing as the service pressed forward. "Stop!" the girl shouted, the word tangled in her sobs. She lunged, struggling against the hands that caught at her arms. One shoe slipped off in the scuffle, left behind on the grass. She gasped between cries, her words breaking into fragments. "She's singing our song." Everyone froze. The air itself seemed to tighten. From beneath the box, from below the fresh soil, rose a faint, wavering hum. At first, impossible to place. Then clear enough that faces drained as they recognized the melody once sung to the child each night. Programs fluttered in the wind, the neat print declaring a life ended. Yet against those claims, the sound carried, fragile but steady. No one moved. Only the girl, eyes red and fierce, stepped closer. She seemed certain of what she'd heard, and in the silence that followed, her certainty began to press on everyone else, too. The girl crouched low, pressing her ear tight against the coffin's side. The wood felt cold against her cheek. For a moment, there was only silence. Then the faintest shift, like cloth dragging across itself. 3 taps followed, sharp and steady, a rhythm she knew from their secret hide-and-seek signals. Her breath caught, and she scrambled upright. "Papa," she whispered, tugging her grandfather's sleeve. "She answered me!" His hand trembled as he tried to hush her, pulling her close and murmuring in her hair about peace and letting go. But she twisted against him, eyes fixed on the box as dirt fell onto the lid in soft, endless thuds. Each scoop made her flinch. She pulled free with sudden force, her voice rising sharp enough to scatter the birds in the trees. "Stop burying her!" An uncle caught her around the waist as she lunged forward, her bare foot scraping against the mud. Some adults muttered about calling a doctor, about her needing calm. Then it came again. A low hum, broken but real, curling up from the ground like breath through soil. The tune was familiar, a lullaby they had shared, sung each night against thunder rattling the windows. Heads lifted, shoulders stiffened. The minister's prayer book slipped from his grasp, pages fanning open in the damp air. The girl went still in her uncle's arms, searching the faces around her. People who had dismissed her now stood pale, caught in the fragile thread of sound. Her grandfather sank to his knees at the grave, fingers flexing as if ready to claw through the earth itself. She wiggled from her uncle's grip, dropping beside him. Both palms pressed flat to the coffin lid. She leaned in, as if she could feel the sound travel through her skin. "We have to get her out," she whispered. He shook his head, torn between what he'd been told by official papers and what he was hearing now. Hospital paperwork claimed death had already been declared days before. Yet, beneath their hands, the wood trembled again, a soft thump matching her heartbeat. She lifted her wet face to the circle of adults. "Why won't you listen?" The question broke on a sob. Phones shifted in hands, eyes turned away or down. Some seemed waiting for the moment to pass, others frozen in quiet terror. The humming faltered, then stopped. For a long second, there was nothing but the sound of the wind bending the trees. She stayed pressed against the coffin, her small fist tight. Her voice was quiet now. "Mommy's tired." And when 3 faint taps pulsed through the wood once more, she made up her mind. She decided she would not wait for them to hear it. While the adults argued quietly at the edge of the grave, the girl pulled back from them all. She slipped behind a tree, the hush of needles beneath her feet hiding her steps. One glance over her shoulder showed the coffin already half buried. Then, she bolted. The heat of the asphalt seared her soles as she sprinted past the parked cars. She kept her eyes fixed ahead, toward the phone she had seen earlier near the gates, its receiver hanging loose. Her fingers searched the pocket of her little dress until they found 2 coins her grandfather had given her that morning. She fed them in, stretching up on her toes to lift the receiver to her mouth. The line clicked. A steady voice answered. "Emergency services." "What's happening?" The girl clutched the phone as if it were her last chance. "There's a lady breathing in a box. They're covering her with dirt." Her words came fast, tangled together, but urgent. There was a short pause before the operator asked if she was joking. Her chest tightened. She pointed back toward the cemetery, as though the operator could see. "It's my mom." Please, if this part resonates with you, leave a comment. It helps others feel seen. The sound of car doors slamming echoed behind her. Relatives were running, her grandfather in front, tie trailing. She held on to the receiver, desperate. "She taught me our heartbeat song," she whispered. "Listen." A hush seemed to follow. Just long enough for the faint thread of humming to spill into the air again. Weaker now, but still recognizable. The note carried faintly up the line. The operator's tone shifted, losing its doubt. She asked for the address, quick and steady. The girl gasped the cemetery's name, her eyes fixed on the adults closing in. Her grandfather reached her, hands landing firm on her shoulders. Still, she forced one last plea into the receiver. "Hurry. They're almost done." Typing filled the line. The grandfather frowned, about to end the call, when the operator's voice came louder, clear enough for him to hear. She urged that the burial be stopped at once, and that responders were on the way. His grip slackened. In the distance, the first faint rise of sirens cut through the afternoon air. The girl leaned against him, exhausted, but her gaze stayed set on the gates. The grown-ups murmured in confusion and fear, caught between papers they trusted and sounds they could no longer deny. The approaching wail drew closer, promising the arrival of authority that might finally decide what would happen next. 2 squad cars rolled up the gravel path, tires grinding over scattered petals left from funeral wreaths. Uniformed officers stepped into a scene caught between ritual and chaos. The young girl, dirt-streaked and shoeless, in her grandfather's arms. The mourners clustered around the grave as if unsure whether to move closer or back away. The senior officer, broad across the shoulders with gray at his temples, stopped in front of the grandfather. He spoke slowly, his eyes flicking to the child. "Sir, we received a call about someone alive in that coffin." The words felt uneasy, half question, half statement. Before the grandfather could answer, the funeral director hurried forward, tugging at his crooked tie. His voice was sharp with strain. "Officer, this is nothing but shock. The paperwork is in order." He held up a folded paper, shaking it slightly. Everything was done properly. The child broke free, running to the officer. She caught his hand with both of hers, cold and urgent. "Please, just listen." Put your ear on it. Her eyes were glassy but unwavering. The younger officer crouched, his cheek pressed against the damp wood, uniform pants staining in the soil. For a long breath, nothing. Then his head snapped back. He leaned close again, brow furrowed. Sarge, there's movement. And faint, his voice lowered. Could be breathing. Murmurs rippled through the graveyard. The funeral director's hand shook so badly that his paper slipped from his grip. From below came a guttural moan, soft but undeniable. It silenced every whisper. The senior officer straightened, scanning the stunned group. He gave a short nod to his partner. They stepped toward their car and returned with simple tools, the steel heavy and dark in their hands. The funeral director put himself in their path, words tumbling fast, about property, about rules, about what could and cannot be done. The officer's face hardened. "Step aside," he said quietly. His hand was steady as he wedged the iron tip against the seam. Wood splintered with a sharp crack. Heads jerked toward the sound, breaths drawing tight. The girl pressed close to her grandfather, her small hand resting on his shoulder. He nodded solemnly, eyes wet, as if giving her permission to believe what they might find. The second officer worked his way along the lid, sweating with the effort. The seal began to break, and the noise carried across the headstones. What came next held every mourner locked in place. The crowbar gave a final wrench, and the coffin lid lifted with a hollow groan. The girl stood close, her hands knotted in the fabric of her dress, eyes wide as the air shifted. A soft murmur rippled through the mourners as the box revealed what no one had dared hope. Inside, the woman's chest rose. A fragile, shallow movement that looked more like the faintest breath than the stillness expected of death. Her eyelids flickered. A trace of color clung to her skin. One hand rested palm up against the satin lining, curled as if waiting for someone to return it. The girl leaned forward, so near she felt the faintest puff of air slip across her skin. Her whole body froze in that instant. "She's breathing," she whispered, though almost no voice carried with it. Paramedics rushed in with their equipment, plastic pressed against the woman's face, and at once the mask clouded with moisture. That was all it took. For the first time, many of the adults turned silently toward the child. The funeral director stumbled backward, words breaking into fragments about papers and doctors, his certainty unraveling. The senior officer caught him by the arm before he collapsed fully, steadying him without a word. No hands stopped the girl when she climbed onto the edge of the coffin. Her small fingers found her mother's, pressing them tight against her cheek. "You see," she told anyone listening, her voice trembling but firm. "I told you she was warm." A hush fell again as the woman's hand stirred. Her fingers twitched once, then again. 3 light taps, the family's simple signal for "I love you." The girl gasped, caught between laughter and tears, and everyone there knew her signal had been answered. The stretcher clattered into place. Paramedics lifted her mother with practiced speed, winding wires and straps around her. The girl trailed close, barefoot, leaving damp prints on the rails where she clung. If this moment moves you, say so in the comments. It will help others sit with the weight of it. The officers stood back as the stretcher rolled past, the ambulance waiting with its doors wide. Just before they closed, the senior officer bent low toward the child. "You're braver than most grown-ups I've seen," he said simply. She didn't answer, her eyes never leaving her mother's face as it disappeared inside. The siren rose again, carrying mother and daughter away from the graveyard silence and into a different kind of waiting. Meanwhile, another silence was already gathering. The quiet hum of machines in a hospital room, where questions about how such a moment was even possible were about to begin. Doctors stood gathered in the hallway, their voices lowered, trading uncertain phrases about rare conditions where someone may appear gone, but still hold a thread of awareness. Inside the room, the girl sat cross-legged on the tile, crayons scattered around her. She sang their lullaby under her breath, one line repeating until it blurred into a hum. The paper of her coloring book curled at the corners. She pressed hard with her green crayon, drawing a bright rectangle under a yellow sun. Her funeral dress was still smudged with dirt, her knees gray against the floor. She hadn't left her mother's side since the ambulance ride. A weary neurologist crouched nearby. What was she like? He asked carefully. Before they tried to bury her. The girl didn't look up. Her eyes stayed open, she said softly. Her voice got stuck in her fingers. The words puzzled the adults, but they exchanged tense looks. Descriptions like that sometimes hinted at awareness trapped inside a body. From the bed came the faintest rustle. The girl froze, head turning. Her mother's fingers twitched against the sheets. A weak sound escaped her throat, almost swallowed by the beeping machines. Nurses leaned close, uncertain but listening, as she managed to form broken words. I heard every song. Some staff would later frame the case as a near miss, the product of mistakes that stacked together, errors in medication, possible underlying illness, incomplete checks. None of them wanted to speak directly about who was at fault, but everyone understood this should never have reached the point of burial. Doctors suggested the girl's daily repetition of the lullaby may have been more than comfort. They speculated it could have acted like a handhold in the dark, guiding her mother to cling to something recognizable while her body fought its silence. No one could prove it, but even the most skeptical admitted the timing gave pause. Down the hall, administrators studied records and protocols. A single sheet of paper leaned against a water dispenser. The original death certificate, its seal catching the light. Few met its gaze when they passed. Back in the room, the girl climbed carefully onto the bed. She traced the hospital bracelet still circling her mother's arm, the tag that had declared her deceased only days before. As twilight deepened outside, she took her mother's slack hand in both of hers and began to hum again. Faint taps answered her. 3 presses, their hidden code. The story, however, wasn't meant to stay contained in that quiet hospital room. Soon, it would spill into the outside world. News vans soon crowded the street outside the family's home, their cameras angled toward a front yard that had turned into a place of uneasy attention. On morning shows, producers displayed the child's crayon drawing, her mother sketched inside a heart, rimmed by bright colors. And voices on set called the event a miracle. The girl rejected that word. She explained simply that she had listened when adults would not. Within the institutions around them, questions began to ripple. Some staff faced review over how the woman's condition had been declared, and community meetings pressed for new ways to confirm death more carefully. Local lawmakers drafted proposals that would require an extra step in verifying non-hospital deaths, though few spoke in detail about the case. At school, classmates asked the girl to tell the story. Crowds formed around her cafeteria seat, voices clamoring for the parts they wanted to hear. She lowered her eyes to her plate and spoke quietly. That her mother had needed someone who refused to look away. The words were simple, but they carried their own permanence. By summer, her mother had regained much of her strength. She agreed to one interview, seated carefully on the family's porch swing. When asked what had saved her, she thanked the emergency dispatcher who had chosen to listen closely to a frightened child on the line. Throughout the interview, her fingers traced their signal rhythm against the metal chain, almost unconsciously tapping out 3 beats. The family made one return to the cemetery. The temporary grave marker was replaced not with stone, but with a young apple tree. Each year afterward, on a date they called her Rebirthday, they spread a blanket under its branches and shared sandwiches. The girl would bring a book and read aloud, continuing the last page her mother had been too weak to reach the year before. Over time, the media glare faded. What remained were rituals and habits, the small ways that families stayed connected. Some afternoons, when thunderstorms rattled the house, mother and daughter sat cross-legged together on the living room floor, humming their uneven lullaby against the rhythm of rain on the glass. For them, the sound was both memory and reminder. This quiet aftermath carried a larger implication. The rescue forced many to confront an uncomfortable question. How had a child heard truth so plainly, while adults all around her turned their ears toward silence? Adults often brush off children's words faster than they realize, and this story made that tendency painfully clear. Researchers who later reflected on the case suggested that our brains filter out anything that contradicts what we expect to be true. The effect happens very quickly, often before conscious recognition. A child insisting that someone in a coffin is still alive sets off the same reaction as if a child said a tree was talking. The mind discards the claim before it even finishes forming. Psychologists call this a kind of protective reflex. It shields us from panic over false alarms. But that same shield can leave adults blind to truths children catch. In interviews years later, mourners swore they remembered only the wind stirring through the cemetery. Yet recordings picked up faint knocks and even humming. Their minds filled in silence where sound had actually occurred, like a weathered roof letting only certain noises through. Perception had filtered to match what they expected. That invisible barrier explains why the girl had to push beyond words. Her desperation worked only when she demanded the officer put his ear directly to the coffin. Physical proof, felt in vibrations and heard without filter, broke through the dismissal. The knock became real because it bypassed interpretation. Some analysts who studied the footage noticed a strange pause in the adults' reactions. Even when there were subtle shifts in the coffin, no one responded in real time. Whether their eyes overlooked or their brains quietly erased, the result was the same: stillness where movement had been. Only the child, less bound by expectation, noticed. In professional circles, the story has been used as an example of cognitive bias. Emergency and medical trainees are sometimes reminded that when a child insists on something unlikely, it may deserve a quick physical check. Feeling for vibrations, listening directly, or placing a hand on something solid can reveal more than trying to reason it away. These suggestions are not born of certainty, but from caution. The cost of doubting once proved too high. The family's neurologist later posed a question that lingered. Why do adults so often label a child's perception as fantasy when they rarely apply the same doubt to themselves? Her point was less about this one case and more about a broader imbalance. Children's senses may simply run ahead of adult filters. The lasting takeaway was simple. The girl's refusal to stop insisting forced others to test reality in a direct, undeniable way. A small ear on wood, a single thump rising through the grain. That was all it took to expose the truth. And the truth revealed more than one child's courage. It exposed a chain of errors that, if unchecked, could repeat. Could an error like this still slip through today? It's a question many asked after the woman's rescue, and it remains unsettling because the answer is not simple. Modern hospitals and funeral homes have worked to reduce the chances, but no system is airtight. In many places, protocols are more deliberate now. Staff are encouraged to wait longer before making a pronouncement, to use more than one sign of death rather than relying on paperwork alone, and to involve at least two professionals when possible. Families sometimes push for added confirmation, asking for temperature checks, pupil responses, and simple breathing tests. These steps may feel repetitive, but that repetition is what builds safety. Some medical teachers point to the case as an example of why thoroughness matters more than speed. Instead of rushing through a list, they encourage waiting a full minute between checks and asking colleagues to watch alongside them so no detail is lost. A hand pressed to skin can still reveal warmth. A light touch near the eyelashes can still spark a subtle flinch. A mirror can still fog at the faintest trace of breath. No technology replaces those basic acts of patience. While new machines do exist, tools that measure heart and brain activity more finely than the human senses, many professionals agree the most effective safeguard is still human attention. The extra questions, the second set of eyes, the willingness to look again. These are the measures that prevent error. The family at the center of this story has, in quiet ways, turned their experience into teaching. They have met with medical trainees, shared memories of the girl's certainty, and reminded professionals that trust in paperwork is never enough by itself. When they speak, they do not use technical terms. They tell a child's version. I knew she was warm. That simple phrase has stayed with many of the listeners long after formal training sessions ended.
Exercises used in classrooms today often include situations where volunteers practice slowing down their senses, listening in silence, waiting for small signs, distinguishing stillness from faint motion. It feels almost too basic, but that is what keeps it accessible. The point is less about complexity and more about remembering that sometimes the smallest signal matters most. Could it happen again?
Experts say the risk is lower today, but not erased. That lingering uncertainty is what keeps the lesson alive. Assume life and check again. If this account speaks to you, share it with someone who works in healthcare or caregiving. Stories like this remind us that careful listening can change everything.
The story remains with us because it shows how fragile certainty can be.
A single child's voice pulled others back from the edge, reminding them that even in moments governed by paperwork and ritual, someone small and insistent can reveal what's real. She still visits the apple tree where the grave once was. Family gathers beneath its branches each year, spreading a blanket and marking the day as one they chose to count forward, not back. In that quiet, the lesson feels rooted as firmly as the tree itself.
If this moved you, share it with someone who needs to remember that children's voices matter.
And if you want more stories like this, subscribe so you don't miss the next one.